kitchen chaos to well-oiled machines. Get ready for newfangled technology and old-school know-how. Stories and a good bit of fun. I'm Simon, and this is Culinary Mechanic. Joining me today is Don Christie. Don, you're off in Fiji out there, right?
Yeah,
Welcome.
on the West Coast. Yeah.
Awesome.
Thanks.
Awesome. According to my nifty little notepad down here, you're working for Rafe Hotels, and you and I connected on LinkedIn, and I think it was a kind of a great little exchange we had. And then I thought, gosh, we just got to get you on the show. So
Yeah, appreciate
please,
that.
welcome to Culinary Mechanic, and let's just get burning here. Tell me how you got in the industry, man.
Yeah, industry. Thanks for hosting and thanks for giving me opportunity. I think getting in the industry, mum was a chef, my brother was a chef, and I kind of had a few ideas of what I wanted to be. I even tried really hard to be a sailmaker and making sails for yachts and racing yachts in Australia because I was an avid dinghy fisher, sportsman, on the weekends. But I suppose it got into being able to earn an income on the weekends at night in
Right.
Sydney, Australia was easy. And then kitchen hands, and all of a sudden the kitchen hands helping out on the larder, and all of a sudden the larder's helping out on the fryer, and all of a sudden, you're like, I'm better off doing this than staying in school. So yeah, and then I think the undertone of my career has always been saying yes to opportunities that have arisen. And so
Cool.
found myself working with really high level Chinese chefs in Australia doing modern French. They're all from Mandarin Orientals and the Peninsula in Hong Kong, and just kind of saying yes to opportunities when they arise.
That's the best way, right?
Yeah, yeah. And then, that's led me to working in remote Japan as a young 19-year-old, coming back to Australia and figuring out that I didn't really want to live in Sydney anymore. So I went and worked on the Barrier Reef and some of the high-end private island that was part of a group. Didn't really know much about hotels, but I knew a lot about kitchens by that time.
Right.
Went and did 1 and 2 Michelin stars in London for pretty well-known brands, and then went and worked up in rural Scotland, which is now a Trump hotel, the Turnberry Resort in Scotland, right around the time that 9/11 happened. And again, saying yes to opportunity, the hotel got shut down for about 6 weeks. And so we, my partner and I now, she stayed in reservations and I cooked for the golf course greenskeepers. And then bounced around back to Australia, did some islands, Lizard Island being the most notorious place, but then going back to the Gold Coast and figuring out I didn't want to be cooking in Australia. I'd seen the world. So I landed a job in Koh Samui, Thailand, and did that. We got there 3 weeks before the tsunami, which was nice, Boxing Day 03. I did 2 years there, and then another private island in the Philippines for Aman Resorts, which is quite a well-known brand now. They've opened up in New York and really taken the world by storm for that luxury sort of model.
Right.
Went back to Australia, did Palazzo Versace. We were talking about the QSR brand that I worked for in Australia through the early 2010s, 14s, Betty's Burgers, which was really cool, which was like an Aussie burger brand taking on the world, taking what worked in America and really started to formalize my business brain in the kitchen. Yeah, and then again, remote rural Australia, so 5-star resorts in the middle of the desert. And then during COVID, I actually went and worked for a hospital. I went and worked for Queensland Health, looking after 9 hospital units. Again, using the business brain of how to put food on plates that are highly nutritious, and then took a year off. The government wasn't for me. And here I am. Here I am 2 years into a 3-year gig here in Fiji, looking after essentially about 1,000 guests here a day. I live on the island, Plantation Island, here in Western Fiji, but we also have a headquarters which I report to every day as well. So it's nice. It's a good problem to have for sure, and a career centered around saying yes to awesome opportunities.
Awesome. Awesome. I mean, I think when you're doing, I mean, at the very top of all of that for me, I worked for some hotels and, I spent some time in the a little bit of resort action. And for me, it was what always was at the heart of everything was we never say no. And I was like, yeah, that makes
Yeah,
total sense to me, right? Like
yeah,
you're spending a lot of money to dine and to stay in a nice space. You should get whatever you want. So I think it kind of it really all goes in line with saying yes to opportunity as well, right?
yeah. Yeah, we
Um,
we flew in lobsters last night for guests that arrived this morning, for example, and that they haven't come too far, but that's something we don't hold on to stock. It's expensive to hold on to some of those what we call a crayfish. But yeah, they turned up and they said, "How come there's not more seafood on the menu?" I was like, "What can we get you? You tell me what you want, and it'll be here in the morning." So the fishermen turned up this morning before we recorded.
awesome, awesome. Um, that's special. I think anytime that you can take care of a guest in that way,
Yeah,
I used to work for a brand that was very Mexican food essentially. And we used to have this manager, and he was just known for be like when you walked in, you were in his house, you know.
yep,
And we
yep,
had we a lot of tourism. I'm in Seattle, West Coast, North Pacific Northwest of the states, and a lot of tourism up here. And so we
yeah.
would
Of course there
have
is.
have these guests come in, and this one lady, she said, "Well, damn it, I want ranch dressing. I want my good old fashioned ranch dressing." And he said, "Okay, just give me a couple minutes." And uh, he came busting through the kitchen. He's like, "I'll be right back." And he went out the back door, and turns out there was a pub tavern kind of thing about two doors down. Goes in, gets a cup of ranch, comes back, pours it into a little ramekin, puts the rest on my table, and says, "Hang on to that for me." Runs out and gets the lady ranch dressing. And it was just,
Yeah,
and I thought to myself, that's hospitality, right? I don't care what level you're at. I don't care whether you're doing burger joints or whether you are doing five-star, luxury resorts. Taking care of people is what it's about. I think that can
yeah.
be, it's special. It's just special. Um, I gotta wonder because I've been out of the States a little bit. I actually was in Copenhagen about 15 years ago, um,
Okay.
in Thailand, but I wonder how has it been for you, obviously having been in London and Australia and now out on the islands. Tell me about kitchen cultures. Tell me about how that's kind of different. Before we started recording, you also mentioned like this is challenging when you're talking about different languages. So I'd love to hear some of that from you.
Yeah. So I suppose, I'm conscious of when I come into a country to know a little bit about the history. Fiji, for example, has been through a number of coups where the government's been overthrown by the military. And so that comes down to power and authority. I was lucky enough when I first got here to work for a guy he was at Plantation as the general manager, Alex. Alex had been here 7 years or so, but he was an Australian Fijian. Hadn't actually been to Fiji that much as a kid, but he's in his early 60s now, and really leads from that village culture. There's the chief's leaders. I don't want to say sort of mafia, but there's the chief's sort of HODs, head of departments, and so he ran it like that. He had an all hands meeting every morning. Still, I mean, like the culture is still the same. There is still a GM, and we all sit around the table. Um, but getting back to kitchen culture, it's about that leadership. They need a strong leader because that's what they're used to back in the village, and they're used to a leader that's going to be with them when it's good and also be allowing them to grow and make mistakes you know when there's slack time. um, Thailand was tough. We changed menus there a few times, and people didn't like the change of things. However, once I got some translators around, it was more about this is better for everybody because we all learn and grow. And I think if you come from a place of trying to develop people and trying to make people accountable and make people better because of the input you've left behind, and again, it's about what you've said a few times in previous episodes, it's about the way you make people feel. If you lead with horror, like I saw in the Michelin-starred kitchens of London, you all you get is horror. But if you lead with love and compassion, regardless of what you do, I think you're always going to be accepted for someone that cares. And I think if I leave any legacy here, it's how I made people feel and how I made people feel like their job yesterday was a better job because of I was involved.
Nice. Yeah. Um, I mean, I was talking to a buddy recently, and he said, "Do you remember that guy?" And I was like, "Bald guy?" And he said, "Yeah." And I thought, "Uh-huh." And he just kind of brought back a conversation that bald guy, and I won't give his name because I don't need him to be upset by anything, but he once looked at me in a company I worked for in Los Angeles, and he said, around here, asshole is tolerated if you're brilliant." And I was like, wow, this is a company with 15 units, and they were on the rise. They were pushing towards 20. And I think that, over the last 20 years, they've probably pushed up over 100 units, of
Okay.
all different ilks. They're on both coasts. They do theme parks, but they also do some stadiums, they do museums, and they also do restaurants. They've
Yep.
pushed out into the world, and they've got restaurants all over the globe. And things have changed. I've checked in with some of those people that I still know with that company, and they're like, "Yeah, that old ethos doesn't hang." But it reminds me that once upon a time that was really common. If you were brilliant
Yeah.
in the kitchen, you could be any kind of jerk you wanted to be. You could be any kind of asshole you wanted to be, and people would tolerate it because, oh my God, look at the food. And I think that as we go
Yeah.
forward, as we venture forward into this new century, it's really fascinating to me. Every once in a while I hear stories of guys and gals that are still like that, but I also hear definitely more stories of people saying, "Hey, like let's get back to learning." You know, um,
Yeah.
let's get back to, I love the village analogy, but I think for me, I think back to some of the times I had in kitchens, it was, "Hey, let me show you how to do that." In fact, why don't the rest of you guys gather around and this is how we flute a mushroom, or here's something that nobody's taught in kitchens in a while, and we should get back to this, and let's try and
For
incorporate
sure.
this on a dish. And I think that kind of having the institutional knowledge of things that have been, even if you're not using them on a menu currently, are super important, right? I think it's
Yeah.
foundational.
I think that the cool thing is when people are open and willing to learn, which takes a while in any culture, but
Hmm.
it takes a when you're significantly different to the other people in your business or the teams that you're leading. It takes a while for people to really grow and understand that you do come from a place of I'm not going to yell all the time. I'm going to yell
Right.
when it's service, or I'm going to yell when something is horrifically bad. But I'm also going to be there to support you when you make a special that really tanks and help you understand why it tanked. I'm not going to
Mhm.
fix all your errors. Um, but I think that some of the horrors that I saw in London at 7 o'clock in the morning when everybody only had 3 hours of sleep and people were really tired, really, really exhausted, and doing things that they shouldn't have done just because the leader was doing them doesn't make them right, but it was a good lesson to learn.
Right. I don't know about you, but I did not get into the restaurant business to spend all my time in a cramped little office. I love being in the kitchen, out on the floor. And if you're nodding your head right now, I want to introduce you to an amazing company called Starfish. Look, I've gotten to know their CEO, Jordan, recently, and what they're building really impresses me. They're using AI to read your P&L, and they're going to email you actionable insights every week so you can lower your costs and increase revenue. Best part is you don't have to spend time digging through your P&Ls, poring over reports in that cramped little office. Starfish is going to do that for you so you can get back to the part of the business that you love. If you're interested, go to their website, usestarfish.com. That's USE starfish.com. And tell them Simon sent you. Yeah, I mean, that's a funny thing. Do as I say, not as I do is always a recipe for
Yeah,
disaster, you know.
yeah,
I think you mentioned change. Change can be hard, but I think I've experienced over the years that when you really get down into things, people want to do better. And so I think if you can show them that you're, like you said, you're gonna at the end of this experience or at some point in our relationship and experience, if it's gonna be better than it was, and maybe that better is just simply you now understand three different ways to do this to solve the same problem.
yeah,
um, but also, sometimes I think it's just people are adverse to change because they don't know, right?
for
Oh,
sure.
what could happen, and for no other reason than cause.
But especially I suppose, and I don't realize it as much as what I probably take for granted is the fact that when you're on an island and you are literally a boat ride away from the closest town, well, I can't get Wagyu beef there on a whim. I can't
Right,
get pasta, fresh rolled pasta on a whim. I need to know how to make it. I need to know how to secure it. I need to know how to source it. And so, kind of being a remote area specialist and a leader in that space, you get really good at figuring out what you can actually put together. We had a pretty bad, somewhat cyclone come through not so long ago, but I knew I had 10 to 15 days worth of stuff that I could lean on if we did get
right.
stuck and boat sank or whatever it could have been. So I know that being resilient is a part of being a good leader, but then training your team to be resilient and figuring out what they can do if they don't have two or three main ingredients and what you can offer.
Right. Well, I mean, I think for me, that is a testament to good foundation, good education, right?
Mm,
And I don't necessarily mean like so many times I hear people like, "Oh, does that mean you went to culinary school?" I'm like, "No, man. I I I committed myself to reading a lot of books and a lot of magazines and a lot of things as time went on. It was eating out a lot and really just getting to understand how other chefs were doing things. Oftentimes, when my wife and I would eat, when we first got together, the conversation for me would be, "Well, I can do that. Well, I know how to do that. Hey, can we
yeah,
order one of those? Because I don't know how to do that. Like, I don't know how to
yeah,
do that dish right there. I'd like to eat that." And so then you get it on the plate and you're like, "Oh, okay, maybe I know how to make that sauce, but I don't know how to make that. Like, how the hell is it did
yeah,
they do that?" And so I think all of those things to say, like deep foundational elements are really key. And I think I want people who are listening to this right now to realize you can have some fancy tools, right? You can have the tweezers and you can have the stuff and you might even be able to do some neat gels, but if you don't know how to cook, if you don't really like take
yeah,
time to understand sort of what was, I find it really hard to figure out what can be. I think that
yeah.
depth of education, whether it be formal or not, is super important to me, and I feel like it's lost a lot in some kitchens that I'm seeing nowadays.
Yeah, I think that I'm fortunate enough to still have the ability of we have a kitchen butcher, and we butcher our own meat to a certain extent. But I know a lot of guys that won't buy those primals because they don't know how to do it. But I know if if something gets slaughtered at the village and brought across for literally 400 or 500 people that might be eating, I know how to break that down if I need to, or and my guys know that I know. In the Philippines, we had a whole primal, a whole cow that came across for. It was a village sort of handover to another sort of leader, and we put the whole cow on the spit. And if I didn't have the ability to know where things were going to go bad on that spit as it rotated, and I knew
Right.
hip joints were going to dislodge, and parts of the shoulders and necks, all that really heavy. If I didn't know, that could have been a mess. but everyone was like, let's put it on the thing. Let's get the generator turning and let's figure it out. But if you don't know the basics, you don't know. But I think that our business has been glorified by TV shows in the last decade or so to an extent where I haven't heard it for a while, actually. And I speak to a lot of guests. I haven't heard the whole MasterChef for a long time. MasterChef took over in Australia, really was a big thing. And My Restaurant Rules and these shows that took couples, and you hosted all the other contestants in your house and you did a dinner that night, and two chefs sat at the end of the kitchen table and glorified cooking. And I'm like, yeah, we've been doing this for 15 years. We've been doing this for 20 years. We know how good it makes people feel. And these people have won shows and have done cookbooks and done the influencer thing on social media. Get them to come out to Fiji and figure out what it's like. Have them run something. It's not about 3 dishes you know how to do well. It's about the leadership and culture that you can instill in a team to deliver high-class culinary, no matter the season, no matter the climate, no matter the location.
Yeah. I mean, there's a little nitpicky in me that says it's hard for me to accept some of the TV folks, because there's one show and they have like that, when they're introducing the people, like, hi, I'm a social media chef. First of all, I think you're a social media cook personally, right?
Yeah.
Like I think I get a little too fussy and traditional when I start defining those roles, and I've softened a little bit because if they're great cooks, they're great cooks. All I ever really want to be is a great cook, and my measure of that is what other great cooks think, right? Like I've been lucky enough to cook for some pretty phenomenal people over the years, and I've cooked for some celebrities, and great, but because you're famous doesn't mean you know food.
Yeah.
And I think that, like, remembering that chef for me really is chief, and there's so much more than the cooking to it. We've glorified that name, or that title of chef, to the point where we think that the food is everything, and food's important, don't get me wrong, but I think it's the act of being able to, as you say, run an establishment, run a restaurant, when it's going poorly, because oftentimes it's pretty easy to run a restaurant when everything's firing the way it should be. When there's shortages because of cyclones, or 5 of your staff went out and got way too hammered last night and they show up looking like a wreck. How do you motivate that team to go forward? All those little things. That for me is what a chef is being. I think that also is, I love the idea of people glorifying, a meal together, because I think for me, that's one of the most special things, is when the team gets to sit down and eat a meal, and maybe it's just a pot of scrap that somebody's thrown some onions and tomatoes and chilies, and I worked in Mexican food, so it was a lot of spicy sort of stews that had tortillas next to it, and that was it. But I think there's community of food, and I really try and separate them. Actually, I mean, the name of my podcast is Culinary Mechanic for a reason, right? I wanted to separate what has become chef from the mechanism that is food service, that is running a restaurant. Because for me, all of those things, the receiving, right? The receiving, the prep, the systems, all the skills that go into that is a machine, And so
I think you nailed it with the mechanic of, don't judge me when the car's running well. Judge me about how I'm still doing laps when there's duct tape and there's some some straps holding everything together. Judge me on my worst day, and I still deliver. Like every resort kitchen I've worked in at some point has had one outlet or one area or the day shift or something is just not working. And 9 times out of 10, it's that culture fit. Someone doesn't understand another culture. And in Australia, we've been fortunate enough to have every culture you could imagine. We've got Malaysian guys coming down doing visas. We've got a lot of Nepalese guys coming down and doing visa exchanges. We've had the Chinese for years. We've had Indonesians. Of course, there's the Kiwis that come across that pretend they're Australian. And then, so like we've got all these cultures, and it took a long time for it to really sort of get big. But saying some things in front of a Nepalese chef that most chefs would swear and say these words, they'll bring a knife to your neck. You know, things about mothers and things about, you know, wives and cheating and girlfriends and these sorts of things. Some of these Nepalese guys, they'll knife you.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And so, like, understanding different cultures is critical, especially when there's Buddhists. We've got a lot of Japanese. We've got a lot of Chinese. We've got, you know, so there's all these cultures. So it's not just personalities, but you're affecting and influencing other people's belief systems. And so when it comes to cultures, it's about really understanding what's in the room and who the crowd that you are talking to, not thinking you're talking to, but who are they and where did they come from? I've been out to some of the boys' villages here in Western Fiji, and there's a lot of guys that wouldn't do that. But it meant a lot for me to go out and see where these boys have grown up and lived. They're not somewhere I want to live, but you know what? I've got the opportunity to sort of help them change. And when the borders opened up after COVID, we lost a lot of really good chefs here in Fiji, a ton of good chefs, but they've all come back because they like the culture that is Fijian hospitality.
Excellent.
And so, you know, when you talk about change and you talk about that change mechanism of leadership, I think it's about understanding every part of who's in your business and what they believe and what's true to them, and then figuring out how you can sort of use that as your advantage in business.
That's really well said, man. Honestly, I think that I as a leader have always tried to understand, like, you know, sometimes it's better to have, you know, first, it's really important to understand, I think, who, like you said, who you're dealing with, you know, and their motivations. And I think a simple example of that was I had one of my chefs, and our shifts in this company tended to be 7 to 8 hours long. And he ran one of our busier restaurants. And one day he comes to me and he goes, "Hey, can I change around my schedule?" And I was like, "Do whatever you need to do." And he says, "People can't hang for this many hours when we're this busy." And I said, "So what do you want to do?" He says, "I want to create 3 shifts." He says, "Instead of lunch
Nice.
and dinner, I want to have lunch, I want to have swing, and I want to have dinner." And
Yeah.
I said, "Great." And so he all of a sudden started hiring people at 4.5 to 5 hours because most of our cooks were working 2 jobs. And so
Yeah.
it was really interesting. He had a group of folks who were bakers. So they were going to work at 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock in the morning, finishing at 9 or 10. They'd get a break, then come and work with us from like 11 to 5, right? And again, it's pretty simple food, but man, we were so busy, especially in the summer. Just, you know, when you're talking about Mexican food, you're talking about a Sunshine brand, right? It's
Yeah.
margaritas, it's tacos,
Yeah.
it's umbrellas above you and sitting outside. And so we would just get so busy. But it was so interesting to me how in tune he was with the fact that he was killing people. He was killing people at 7, 8 hours, right? It was too much.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so, you know, he was more interested in being able to create that machine that ran. He says, "But I have to do it differently. Is that going to be okay?" And I was like, "Do whatever you need to do, man." He goes,
Yeah.
"Oh," you know, and so I think of that as a very simple example of what you're saying, you know, but you gotta see who's in front of you. I think that um mentioning humor and like what is funny to one group of people is going to cause violence from
Yeah.
another group, and I
Yeah.
think that's important too. um I also think, first, as I'm listening to you talk, I'm like, you know, Malaysian, Chinese, Japanese. For me, as a person that's been in the United States my whole life, Um, the language I needed to learn to speak was Spanish,
Yeah,
right?
of
And
course.
I'm like, if I don't, but I leave behind that, and I don't have much to stand on, But
Yeah.
we also, there's certain things down in Latin America. When you get down to the south of Mexico, you're on the border of Honduras and Guatemala. And funny thing is, the Yucatecans, which is the Yucatan, the very southern end of Mexico, is right next to those two other countries. And if you've got a Yucatecan and you've got a Honduran and you got a Guatemalan, you have a rumble. You do not have
Yeah,
peace,
interesting.
right? Like
Interesting.
you learn that, like, if you have those two or three different cultures, you don't keep them together, right? Like, okay, you're going
Yeah,
to work
okay.
over there and you're going to work over there. And then you
Yeah.
throw in Salvadorians, right? And they're now into Central America, and
Yeah.
nobody, like, oh, that's tough. And then going farther down, like, I learned that Peruvians don't like Chileans, and Argentinians don't
Yeah.
like anybody, and those are generalizations, right? Those are generalizations, but some of that, like, I learned in some of these kitchens where they all speak Spanish, but it's like, I don't want to work with that guy on the fish station. Why? Well, blah blah, and he's got some sort of epithet to
Yeah, okay.
spew, and I'm like, that doesn't have anything to do with anything, but it's down in their core, right? It's what they were taught to believe from a very young age. So okay, right? And so
Yeah, I
yeah,
like that.
you definitely got to know who you're dealing with.
I liked that. So in between the government and coming here, I took a year off, and 3 months of that was in Mexico. We were just hanging around. We went through Merida and all down through that area, and then not in the normal sort of Puerto Vallarta or Cancun for very long,
Right.
but the small little Oaxaca, the small little.
Oh yeah,
We
you were
love
down
Mex.
in it. Those are great
Yeah,
spots.
yeah, and I didn't get anything but love and appreciation, even though we were there for a month on end. Like, people
Right.
wanted to embrace, even,
Mhm.
and again, it came back to my early days of traveling in Japan when I couldn't speak to anyone in the kitchen. You imagine doing a shift where you don't speak to anyone and just figuring stuff out by looking. And so, like, being appreciative of what people are showing you and being a part of a bigger movement is always important. But yeah, understanding culture is always going to be a if someone gets nothing but our conversation today, just thinking about who you're working with, and
Yeah.
it could be the Anglo-Saxon white fella that you've only just met. He's only just come on board, and he looks clean cut, but you don't know his background. Just don't
Right.
take things for granted, I suppose, is another
For
way of
sure.
saying it. Yeah,
For sure. I was in a Four Seasons resort back in like 2000. And that was one of the hardest jobs I ever had, because there were five, and I'm sure that you can relate to this. There were five different menus coming off of that one line, you
yeah,
know?
yeah.
And we had this guy who had come to us, and he was on some form of visa exchange, and he was from Switzerland. And he was just the
Oh wow.
nicest guy, and he was just so sweet and, like, genuine. And one night, like, the chef was kind of riding him, and, like, he just lost everything that was gentle about him. And he looks at the chef and he goes, "You know what? This fucking isn't fun. Cooking's supposed to be fun. You people are
Yeah,
making this awful." He goes, "This is my 2 weeks notice. I'm getting out of here." And it was one of those where I was like, "Wow, you were just the calmest dude ever until you weren't." you know?
yeah,
And I remember talking to him later, and he goes, "I do this. I've cooked all over the world." He says, "I cook because it's enjoyable. I love working hard, and I love sweating with people from all over the world, and really getting after it." He says, "But when they're mean and they're just riding you because he says, my food wasn't taking long. They were just riding me to ride me." And he says,
yeah.
"When it's not fun, I don't need to be there." And
And
I mean, I learned
we
something
lose
that
sight of the
day.
guests.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's easy to do sometimes, right? We
yeah,
think about how it affects us and how the work affects us. One of
yeah.
the things I was just talking with somebody on an episode recently, we were talking about, like, that last guest of the night. When you're supposed to close at 10 o'clock and they show up at 9:58. Well, I'm sorry, they're you're a guest. Come on in. You know, it's
Yeah,
that the hospitality. And I remember having those arguments both when I was a cook, because I was always taught like you feed people. Right?
yeah,
And like just
yeah,
feed them because I learned that from family. Like my grandmother would feed anybody that came to her door. You know, even if she didn't have much, she'd be like, "Well, we don't have a lot, but you can come on in." You know, and so I always approached it from a like, let's feed them. I worked with cooks who'd be like, no, I want to go home or I want to go party or whatever that is. And then as I rose up and I all of a sudden was in charge of some of these people, understanding that it's a business and the business is taking care of people. The business is hospitality and really
yeah.
getting deep down in the core of that.
When you see the impact that you know local boys that have come up from really really small salaries. I'm talking like if we're talking US dollars, I think we're thinking some of our younger, less skilled staff are $2 an hour here, $2.50 an
Hmm.
hour. But then, for some of those guys to rent in the village would only be $100 a month. So like it's kind of it's all relative. But I think the impact that some great leadership can take is some of these guys will be, chef de parties within 2 or 3 years and earning a solid salary that their mother and father could never recreate. And
Right.
so I always say to these guys, they're scrubbing benches at 8:15 at night, right? On a resort island, you're done. People have laid by the pool all day. They've had the breakfast buffet. The breakfast buffet is pumping at the moment. They're going to do about 450. I can see it on the monitor here. They'll do about 450 today for breakfast. It's just gone 9:20, and so they'll sit by the pool and have a few beers this afternoon. So by 6 o'clock, they're knocking on the door to come into the restaurant. And so some of these guys that they're scrubbing the benches back, and if a guest walk in at 8:15 at night, they're like, and I often say to them, "Where have you got to be? Like, where have you got to be? You're not catching the last bus. These guests are on their own time. They're here. They're here for a holiday." And so when you really focus on the guest and understand that they'll come in at 8:30, or they'll come in at 8:45. We're still open at 9 o'clock. I know you've been in bed by 9:15 some nights, but getting back to my point, Simon, is like sometimes we forget about the guest. We forget that we're rushing to get 25 club sandwiches right. We're forgetting that if the croutons aren't right, that guest experience today, and you don't know what's happened in their life up until coming on holiday, you don't understand what's happened today. For them, for you, it's just a Caesar salad that's on the pass for an extra minute. But for the guest, like our guests book a year out. We know they're coming a year out. So they've been looking forward to it. They've been watching the menus for the last 6 months. They know exactly the menu. I've had people come and question me on stuff that I don't even know what's on the menus. Saying, "Oh, what's that ingredient?" or "What's that thing?" So yeah, you can't lose sight of the guest experience as well. Even though we're 15, 20 dockets deep, we've always got to be inside of both things, managing our teams, but then also managing expectations in front of the plate.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, gosh, to say that we've covered some ground today is an understatement. I love it. I love it. We've
Cool.
been all around the world. We covered different cultures. I think it really, I mean, at the end of the day, we're talking about un meeting people where they are, right?
Yeah.
Whether it's your guests or your team. Really want to thank you for coming to play in my little sandbox in the world.
Cool.
Culinary Mechanic is has absolutely become just a fun little thing to spread spread the good word to the world. I think hospitality is really important, has been an overriding topic for me. So I appreciate that it matters to you. Um, so I'm going to make sure that people can find you and connect and follow you. I
Yep.
believe you and I connected on LinkedIn, and we'll make sure any other social handles are there.
Yep.
I hope one day to that you and I can cross paths in real life because it'd be pretty cool to talk to you and kind of see what you got going down in Fiji, or wherever you end up because it sounds like you're young enough to keep moving. So I appreciate that. That's good. And to all you out there, check us out on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, even YouTube is a thing. Give us a subscribe or a follow and leave us a 5-star review. Really helps spread the word that this is something that other people are listening to. So once again, Don, thank you so much. And to all you out there, I will catch you on the flip side.
Thanks, Simon. Cheers, mate.